and welcome to Pricing College with your hosts Aidan Campbell
and Joanna Wells.
In today's episode, we want to talk about a pricing approach or concept that on initial inspection can seem, a really good idea, but sometimes there may be more negatives that outweigh the positives, and that is zone pricing. So, if you type into two approaches, it could be on a store-by-store basis if it's a large chain, or it could even be on the internet that when you type in your address, the price changes. It sounds great. You could charge different areas different prices, but are there downsides?
Yeah, look, if you think about it, even as a customer, you probably will think, there is a downside. Customers may not like being charged more simply because of where they live, their postcode, because ultimately this is where the information it's investigating where you live, the affluence of your suburb, and ultimately how much you'll be able to spend. Great way to measure spend, but is it fair?
Yeah, fundamentally, I think people have a real, belief that they should be treated fairly. They should be treated equal to everyone else, and that their dollars or pounds or euros going into a store should be equal to the next person's. And sometimes it could really breed a resentment that whether it's a postcode lottery, you might want to use that term, or it could be even like a tax or a penalty on someone who goes to from a certain area. And what would the reasoning for that be? Would it be it's a higher socio-economic area with higher incomes and they feel they could charge more, or whatever other reason? It could even be, it could, in a cost plus environment, there could be good reasons why a company may want to do this. If you've got very regional, remote stores and shipping stuff to that location, that might make sense. But I think in many regards, people want to pay the same price and believe that is their right.
Yeah, I know. Like if you think about it, I suppose on the other side, from a firm's perspective, they just really are keen to get the right metrics and measures in place so they can really understand the market. So to them, logically speaking, it makes complete sense to do so using postcode data and all of that to understand spend, because as Aidan was saying, spend and willingness to pay seem to be well correlated. So why don't we investigate one if the other one, i.e. willingness to spend, is too abstract and difficult to measure? We can use spend instead. But it just can be difficult when you start using that as a strict measure for everything else, especially in terms of price setting.
Yeah, I think postcode is a very blunt instrument. Obviously, depending on the country and city you're in, postcodes can be small or massive, and you could have huge numbers of varied suburbs and areas in those areas. Very, very diverse populations. So, like the drivers, there's got to be more drivers than just simply your location. We always say in this podcast, there's probably hundreds of drivers driving something. If you're trying to sell any product, do you really think the postcode location is the biggest, most logical way to segment your market? I would suggest no. If it's getting down to a cost plus mechanism where it's posting stuff out to people, there's a very simple way to fix that. Is you charge them a separate postage price when you get to the cart and checkout, and people accept that. They if you live in islands remote off the coast, it's a bit different than being 2 miles from the depot. So I think people accept that if in those instances. But I think if you're trying to, you jump online and you type in different postcodes and it gives you different pricing, or if it can of course just read your IP, etc. as well and give you different pricing, I think that would start to annoy people. I also think you'd have a high chance of getting bad media coverage if the newspapers got onto that, because it's a very easily spinnable story. If you want to spin that story to make it look like big corporates are taking advantage of people in certain areas, I think you're walking into a trap if you try that one.
Yeah, so maybe if you're trying to calculate cost to serve a customer, it might be a useful input, I suppose. But I suppose this is why, in terms of price setting, businesses are moving away from purely that cost focus to more value-based focus, and thinking more broadly about drivers of purchase and drivers of demand to calculate price. Asking questions such as, how has this customer group come to us? What are they looking to buy from us? Why are they buying these particular products and services from us? How are they consuming our products? Now, these are the more important sort of drivers of demand. that you should really be using in a value-based price setting process. And it will really get you away from those more difficult sort of conversations and issues with, postcode and zone pricing. That can get a bit messy, and also it's quite limited. I suppose in terms of generating those additional price premiums that you actually are looking to find, and but yet fairly and in line with what customers are willing to pay. So going down the value-based route, asking those questions about why people are buying will really help you generate more profit dollars for your services and products.
I think we always say common sense is required. I think common sense is not very common, but in this instance, it's a bit harder to explain. Obviously, in many businesses in smaller towns or certain areas, it's perfectly understandable that prices will be maybe lower than in the nation's capital or more, the richest portion of the country. This could go from restaurants to haircuts to anything like that, whereby the price will be influenced by, to a large extent, the labour input of the people in the area and then the employment prospects, etc. So, of course, if you're in a smaller area or more remote region, you might be able to buy a drink in a bar for less than you would in a fancy bar in the city. It could also apply to haircuts. I think what you really want, and that's perfectly understandable, the difficulty gets into it when your segmentation or your matching local pricing or those aspects which are perfectly legitimate, you have to be just very careful that everything you're doing could not be perceived as in any way discrimination against people or exploitation of certain aspects. So I think if you're trying to sell a consumer product that's the same item at different prices, different geographies, you could get into some sort of murky ground, or it could be perceived or spun in different mechanisms. I think that's something that anybody sensibly would want to avoid and not get into. Just the potential benefit of a few extra dollars here just wouldn't be worthwhile the potential downside in my belief. Of course, though, if you're trying to compete in a town with, you really have to think about the value offer you provide. If the price level for takeaway sandwiches in this town is much lower than elsewhere, you really probably have to do a bit of a match to market in that area, and that is more of a. But again, that's a match to market. It's not postcode lottery. It's not discrimination against on a postcode basis.
Yeah, I suppose, and this is what a good pricing team would do. They would look at, particular price points in relation to where they sit in the price structure, and that is in between, your floor prices and also the price ceiling, the price parameters for everything that you sell. Then they'll look at, what is the overall business strategy? Is our pricing aligned to that strategy, and where is our price? What's our price positioning in the market? Just because we can price higher in one zone, does that go against our price positioning, our business strategy? Are we within our price parameters? They'll be asking all those questions, making sure they check the boxes for everything, because if you don't, you can find yourself in some very dealing with some very difficult issues, and using this as one measure, just to using what customers are willing to spend, what they can spend. Zone pricing isn't bad, but it has to be considered in relation to a lot of other inputs. And a good pricing team will do that. They won't just lead with that input, because it can lead to very difficult discussions and legal issues further down the line. So just bear in mind, when you're dealing with pricing, having that internal expertise can be really, really important. It just gives you confidence that your pricing's in order and aligned to your business strategy and everything else in the business.
Yeah, so that's it for me today. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks a lot.